It is good.
It really works.
It is good.
Little, you take a little edge on things.
Welcome to another episode of the Creative Power Hour. I had to just talk because there was no way I was going to get her to stop. Welcome, my guest, Amanda Little.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here.
I'm so happy you're here too. Thanks for doing the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're like a big deal.
Oh,
You were on Fresh Air with Terry Gross.
That's true.
That makes you a big deal.
That's true. I'll take it. It was brief.
It
was brief.
For all the geeks out there, that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
All right.
As someone who's done a lot of interviewing.
Yeah.
It was very interesting being on the other side.
Okay. So one of my favorite things about the show is, in life, we capture all these acquaintances, right? And now with all the connections that we have to make all the time and social media, blah, 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 we're like, oh, this is my friend, right? So I put you in the bucket of being a friend. I went to your birthday party.
You did.
I have to be a friend if I go to a birthday party, right?
Well, it was Alice Randall's birthday party too.
Doesn't matter. It was your birthday party too.
You.
Okay. But I know in the next 50 plus minutes, I'm going to learn so much about you. And then we'll really be friends, which is awesome.
That's so great. So this is just cementing. This is sealing the deal.
Yeah, for people who I really want to be friends with.
That's great.
Yeah,
I love this as a way of building friendships, and it's like speed dating.
Yeah, but
platonic speed dating.
Yeah, but in the hour, it's a good amount of time.
Yeah,
hour's a good amount of time.
It is.
Yeah,
I don't think I've talked to my children or my partner for that amount of time. I can't remember the last sustained period of time we had a really focused conversation.
That is the point. So we start with an origin story here.
Okay.
And you can start wherever you want. I like to point people to childhood because I think people, grown-up people, don't think enough about the fact that they were once kids. And so almost when you just go back there and you start thinking about it, it makes the story you're going to tell about yourself today even more rich. So your origin story.
I was recently reminded of a story from my childhood. I have very few memories from my childhood. I have very vivid dreams, but I have very few memories from my childhood. It's interesting. Most people have very vivid childhood memories and don't remember their dreams.
Yeah.
So I have
there's a whole Netflix special about this, by the way.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, 5-part. It's they're 20 minutes a piece. Emma Stone is doing the narrating. It's called The Mind, I think.
Oh,
you should check it out because it actually talks about memories and dreams, and you should
I'm
check it out.
so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I'm currently reading Steven Pinker's How the Mind Works, so this is right on.
It's right
on topic for me.
Awesome.
So I was reminded by a friend from high school at an event in San Francisco. I've been on the road for a book tour for this book that I just published called The Fate of Food, What We'll Eat in a Bigger, Hotter, Smarter World, about feeding humanity in the coming century.
So excited to talk about this.
And I have been reconnecting with high school friends and college buddies and stuff along the way. And one friend said, while I was up there chatting on stage about climate and agriculture and these things that are it's somewhat arbitrary for me. There was very little in my path that threw me into these topics. But the talking itself makes a lot of sense. And she said, I was watching you on stage, and I remembered the time in 4th grade math class when Mrs. Caulfield taped your mouth shut. and I said, oh, my God, I completely forgot about that. But it is absolutely true. I don't think it would happen now in the 21st century, but it did happen then. It would have been in about fourth. So it would have been about 1984.
Oh yeah,
1983.
Teachers could do that.
Teachers could do that. They could, and she pulled out the double wide masking tape. And I had been a bit disruptive in class and was sort of talking over the teacher. Definitely confident, not a great math student, so I don't know exactly what I was contributing, but clearly it was not useful to the class. And Caulfield said, if you keep talking, I'm going to tape your mouth shut, which was, of course, the perfect invitation for me to
Oh,
keep
yeah,
talking.
absolutely.
And then, 15
Complete
seconds
opposite
later,
intended outcome.
like out comes the masking tape, and she puts it across my face, and of course everybody's so amused. And it was, this was like high entertainment in fourth grade math. But it was speaking as defiance. I was really interested in talking and the power of words. I don't know, the content wasn't very strong, but performance. It was a kind of performance that was interesting to me. And yeah, so much of my work now is about communication. I teach undergrads, and I write and increasingly do a lot of public speaking, and I'm interested in the power of words as disruptive, as a kind of disruptive force, and as a form of mobilization and activation. And I went to college, I came of age sort of in the 80s and 90s, was in college in the late 90s. And it wasn't a very politically activated time.
It wasn't.
So there was not a whole lot. There wasn't a whole lot that I could do with this interest in disruption and words. And so here we are now in a time when we really need to use words in a way that's really motivating and potentially disruptive. So. Yeah, that came to me recently. That story was a gift from this friend that I met along the way. But I basically got into journalism in 1996. I graduated from university. I can't remember a whole lot about high school. It wasn't a great time for me. It was a really
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Washington, D.C. Well, New York City until I was 5 years old,
Okay.
and then D.C. But
Big city kid.
Big city kid.
Always.
The city was
Wow.
deep in the DNA.
Wow.
I still sort of, everything sort of resonates for me in harmony with New York City when I'm back there.
I can totally. I'm from Brooklyn, and it's like if you're not from the city, it's sort of a weird thing for people to understand how much peace you can find when you're in the city. But like it is almost like there's just like this hum in your body is like one with it.
Exactly.
That you don't. I don't get when I'm in like nature and in the country. I have to sort of acclimate my. I know it's good for me.
Yeah.
I know it's very good for me,
Yeah.
right? I'm not dealing with all the EMF and all that stuff, but like.
Yeah. I hit the tarmac at LaGuardia, or even almost JFK and Newark can do it for me, but really I hit the tarmac LaGuardia, and it's right. It's as though all the cells in my body sort of rearrange in synthesis with this like overriding chaos. Chaos is very calming for me.
You get plugged back in.
I get plugged back in, and it's interesting. My husband is someone who really enjoys order. That's very calming for him, and somehow chaos for me is a calming force. I really like it when the world around me is more chaotic than I am. It sort of calms me down a bit.
That's an interesting.
But I got out of university in '96, which was sort of the beginning of that dot boom time.
Yeah.
And my college roommate had been the editor of the campus newspaper at Brown University, where I went, and she had gotten me a little bit into writing. But I got into journalism really sort of haphazardly because it was dropped, she sort of was down a few articles and, hey, will you fill in something? And so I'd never kind of dreamed of becoming a reporter or a journalist, but I did sort of by accident. And then also it was this moment when there was...
Did you know Christian Rutherford?
No, at Brown.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
And I came to New York at this time when there was a lot to write about because it was just that early stage of the digital revolution, as it was called at the time, probably accurately, and I could be an expert writer, reporter,
yes,
because there were no experts, and so
yes.
I really jumped pretty quickly into this world of writing about technology. and that eventually I stumbled from technology into the environment. Because in the late 90s, suddenly the most interesting technology was addressing some environmental pressures and challenges. So by 2000, the first IPCC report, International Panel on Climate Change report, had come out, or the one that got, the first one that got a lot of attention in the mainstream. The first Prius was out. The first, solar panels were coming out. So it was sort of like this clean tech thing was getting some attention. And I wrote this cover story for New York Magazine, predicting that a blackout was going to take out Manhattan, that our energy grid was antiquated, and that we basically didn't have enough infrastructure to maintain this
quick qualifying question. Were you a freelancer? Were you employed? Like what?
I was writing a column for the Village Voice newspaper in Manhattan, which is maybe still alive. I'm not sure.
No.
Is it dead?
No, I did a show with Libby Calloway talking about the fact that it's dead.
It's dead. R.I.P. Village Voice. Well, Nashville Scene is still alive and is
still alive,
and is sort of a cousin of the
that's right. It's part of that whole alt zine thing, kind of thing,
right? And it really mattered in the city. So I was writing a column for them on technology in the city, and I was writing regularly for Wired magazine and occasionally for New York Magazine at the time. And I was writing for feedmag.com, which was the first online magazine. And that was my first job out of college, was writing as a staff writer for
feedmag.com.
Yes, feedmag.com. Because at that time, we actually thought that
it's so early.
mag.com was going to become sort of a, part of the, lexicon for publishing online, something mag.com, right? So,
by the way, that's a totally reasonable idea at that time. I mean,
I know. I think we probably wanted feed.com and it wasn't available because it was being used for like an animal feed company.
Most people were getting online by AOL at that point,
That's right. That was
AOL. It was AOL era, right?
I had
So the context is really important, right? There's so many, like if you're a millennial, you have no idea what that's like. Zero. You don't know what AOL is like. But like AOL made the whole internet into like this group of magazines and newspapers sort of online. It was chat rooms, and then it was like publications, basically, right?
That's right. Well, and so Feed Magazine was started by Stephen Johnson, who's now a really, really interesting writer on tech and science. But it was really the first, online magazine at the time. Blogging really hadn't even started taking off. I mean, this was really before all that. And we actually became part of the nytimes.com sort of family of online content, because New York Times Online wasn't really a thing either. And so to have original online content for an existing print brand was not done it was just a totally brand new idea. Of course, now something like the Atlantic or the New Yorker or these, print brands have much bigger, 20x times bigger audiences online than they do in print.
Right.
And same thing with the Times and Washington Post, etc. But at the time, all this was brand new. And so I was writing for them, and I was doing this, Silicon Alley kind of writing for Village Voice and Wired and so on. But then all of a sudden there were too many people writing about online tech, and this dot boom thing, and then there was the dot bust, and anyway, it didn't have as much allure in terms of storytelling for me as this new thing that was this energy and environmental tech that were coming online, right? And so. And actually, I did this, as I mentioned, this cover story for New York Magazine about basically how we were going to continue to feed energy into this city that was ablaze with, billboards that were LED screens and lights and this city that was increasingly energy intensive. And these industries that were increasingly energy intensive, but the brittle electric grid that was keeping New York City alive, literally lit up, was fraying. Was literally sort of bursting at the seams. The actual grid. And so I did a story about that we won't be able to pipe enough electricity to the city.
Okay, now was that before? Because I was back in the city in the late 90s, and I remember when the brownouts started happening.
That's right.
Was this before the brownouts
So
started
the
happening?
California brownouts were happening, and that was a big deal around 99.
Yeah.
And so I wrote this story in, I think it was 2000, and then 2 years later, I think it was around 2002, there was a huge blackout in the city.
Yeah, no,
but basically,
it was bad.
What the premise of the story was the brownouts of California are coming to New York.
Yeah.
Like, we are not going to be able to sustain. We're outpacing the infrastructure, and then of course 2 years later we had this massive blackout. So yes, it was very vindicating for me.
Wow.
But I made this transition from IT and digital into energy tech and infrastructure, and then eventually into environment and agriculture and water and all these other areas.
Right.
Really right around that millennial shift around 2000, because it was sort of, we were oversaturated with stories about IT and .com, and I really was like, how are we going to do this in really technologically intensive economy if we don't have clean energy and a viable energy infrastructure to support it? At the time, I wasn't very deliberate in knowing that that's what was happening in my career, but that's what was happening. And so I started moving into writing about clean tech, and then eventually I realized you can't do it without the support of policies that can, really help shift and promote these disruptive technologies. And so I really started writing about environmental policy, and it was the Bush era, so there was this huge all these huge rollbacks on environmental tech. I started writing for grist.org. I did a column for Outside Magazine about clean tech and innovation. I was writing for Rolling Stone about national affairs and the environment. And so I really started shifting from, purely technology writing to sort of issues writing. And then I got into climate and climate issues. And now a lot of my writing has really been an effort to reframe and rethink the climate change story and understand it, through sort of different lenses, find ways into that story. So my recent book has been an effort to think about climate change through the lens of food and feeding humanity.
Were you writing about climate before An Inconvenient Truth?
Yes.
How far before that?
I'm trying to think of the timing on that. I wish I'm looking like, who can Google it? Is it 2000?
Who can look this up, Des? Can you look this up real quick?
2006 or 7?
Yeah, we'll keep talking, but just look up when An Inconvenient Truth
I think it was
came
2006, 7. I'm guessing something around there. My book came out, maybe it was, but I wrote a book called Power Trip, The Story of America's Love Affair with Energy.
Okay.
And my beat was really energy reporting and energy policy and, trying to understand climate change and our addiction to fossil fuels and our heavily polluting economy through the lens of energy. And I 2006. Yeah,
Bingo.
there we are. So my book came out about a year or two after that. It was 2007-8. But my reporting on energy, on climate and energy, started in 2000, and with that New York magazine cover story about, wait a minute, how are we going to do this if we don't have a really, we can't do IT, we can't get to a smart economy if we don't have a really sustainable energy system. And so that's where I really started. And then we can't do that if we are, heavily polluting and have a very climate intensive
before
economy.
The topic, and one of the reasons why I wanted to ask about The Inconvenient Truth is because I think while that movie did bring the topic to mainstream awareness, it also made it highly politicized, just because Al Gore is a political figure.
Yeah.
End of story, right?
Right.
And so I'm wondering, and then when something becomes highly politicized, then you start getting, kind of nasty terminology like climate deniers and, like just things that, whether or not I agree with the term, these are terms intended to like smear people or, it's politicized, right? Prior to that, when you went from, tech very, very early, obviously this is what happens when you become an expert in something, you just get deeper and deeper, down the rabbit hole of understanding what's really driving it and you start talking about climate in 2000, it wasn't a mainstream or a politicized thing. How were people responding to you then about the topic? Were people more curious and open to understanding it then than now?
That is what's so interesting.
That's what I would think.
It was a much more bipartisan issue.
Yeah.
And in fact, remember around that time, and we probably need to look this up again, but the McCain-Lieberman bill there were some early bills proposing, carbon pricing, which is, the holy grail of serious climate legislation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were bipartisan bills with very ambitious proposals for radically reducing carbon emissions in the U.S. economy. To say nothing of the international agreements that were then forged later on. But, the Paris Climate Agreement and so on, and President Barack Obama's efforts to negotiate. Even, George W. Bush was much more out front on climate issues and his administration on climate science than, of course, the Trump administration.
Sure.
But yes, this issue really, really shifted it must have been around at the end of the Obama era. There has been a really interesting shift, increasing politicization of the climate issue. And at that time in 2006, 2007, yes, Al Gore might have been part of that kind of shift toward increasing sort of politicization of the issue. But at the time, there was a pretty significant consensus. The Pentagon was way out front on climate issues. Exxon, the oil companies were way out front on climate science. In their at least lip service. Mm-hmm. It was just discussed as a kind of, yes, we all agree that
right.
climate change is real and a kind of scientific reality.
Yeah.
What we do about it is, should we adapt? Should we try to mitigate?
Lots of discussions need to happen about that.
Nothing like what we're talking about now.
Right.
Which is actually really part of what motivated my interest in food and writing about climate through the lens of food and food production, because it's something that's so intimate. It's such an intimate framing. It's much more, people care much more about what they eat than, flipping on the lights and, really what car they drive.
Yeah.
And, eating is just a much more emotional topic. And really, I began to see that the main way most humans on this planet are going to experience climate change is through its impact on food and food production and food prices and the variety of foods we have access to. And so that then became really fascinating to me. And also there's a big link between agriculture and energy and fossil fuel use in food production. So there was some continuity with my career, but really I was going, why is this story so hard to tell? Why is it so hard to get consensus on the climate change issue? And how can we begin to explore this in a way that feels more immediate and where we can really understand the sort of relevance of this in our lives? Because somehow talking about it in terms of politics isn't really working clearly.
No.
Talking about it in terms of, our energy use isn't working very clearly. But when we suddenly realize that the food traditions we hold dear and, the flavors we love and the crops that we rely on heavily, for me, for example, coffee, is, really vulnerable. A lot of the crops and the foods we love most are really vulnerable. That was exciting and interesting to me, and also as a storyteller and also as an eater, and so my career took another plot twist. There was this continuity of.
We're going to circle back to the coffee one.
Yes. It's an important topic.
Yeah.
But the origin story has always been how do we make this story feel important and immediate and relevant. to mainstream readers and citizens
or fourth grade classmates.
Or fourth grade classmates, right? And right, what can you shout out that is worthy of being heard? And in fourth grade, I didn't have very good content. I've been trying to improve the content over time. I think I finally got some really interesting stories in this most recent one. But that, yes, do you have something to say, and how loud can you say it are two very different things. I've always been a loud talker. Now I'm trying to be a really interesting and effective storyteller.
We're going to circle back to the book and to climate, because I've just got stuff I want to ask about it, and I'm making some changes in my own life around food. And there's lots of reasons, but certainly the environment is one of them. When we met, I think we met under the context of the Fisk board.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
The board of trustees at Fisk.
Okay.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. How did you end up on the board of trustees at Fisk?
I was writing. I did a piece for the New York Times Magazine on environmental justice, and the disproportionate impacts of industrial pollutants on low-income communities, largely communities of color, in the U.S. And someone on the board read the piece, and Fisk University has some really important, research and professors focused on environmental justice. And I was in Nashville and teaching at Vanderbilt, and so they kind of felt like it would be really interesting to have you serve on the academic affairs committee and sort of bring your perspective as a Vanderbilt professor and someone focused on environment and environmental justice, climate justice, et cetera, into the fold. And my reaction was, really? Me? Great, and that was 7 years ago, I think. It's been, I've been serving on the board for many years and just have learned so much about Fisk and the history of that incredible university. And it's an amazing, let's talk about what a story. I mean, it's an amazing part of Nashville history that is so poorly understood by most residents of the city and poorly supported. I mean, inadequately supported, particularly by the music industry, and which sees itself as the reason that this is Music City. Really, this is Music City because of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. Yeah. And there's this amazing chasm between Fisk University and even the, hipster Germantown residents that are growing up right around it. Yeah. So there's a lot to be done still to really continue to sort of connect Nashville to Fisk. Fisk has been there a lot longer than, hipster Nashville. But I really fell in love with the community and the people that I met through my work there and some of the faculty. And it's been one of the most rewarding parts of my work here. I wish that I had, had more time to do more because there's just so much work to be done.
But the way that you got there is through this story. I mean, this story is really...
Yeah,
your adult life.
It is.
I mean, like, yeah. Am I overstating that?
Thank you for putting it that way. I, have been wondering about the human story, and that angle. The environmental justice piece and the climate justice piece, and how environment and environmental issues are relevant to everyone, how we move this out of the white elite, how we stop talking about this as something, that really has been branded by, LL Bean and Al Gore and, even some of the rising stars of the, meat alternatives movement, Ethan Brown and Pat Brown and Alice Waters and Michael Pollan. And, lot of the kind of spokespeople for the environmental movement are, white overeducated New Englanders or Californians, and that's not true for I think this next generation of climate activists. There's a lot more diversity and dynamism in the way that we're talking about climate and environmental justice. But I was really interested in these stories that sort of moved environment out of the usual framing, and made it relevant to everyone. And this, I keep pushing this into the, food and climate story, but this is particularly true for food. So much of the sustainable food movement and, the cries for veganism and so on are so isolated and so accessible to this very elite, very white, very high income audience who shops at Whole Foods and does a lot of cleansing and and it's just it's very out of reach and unrealistic and really, in fact, elitist from the perspective of a lot of people.
Yeah, that's right.
And certainly, I can't live the life of a virtuous eater. I don't have the budget to, shop at Whole Foods and buy organic. I'm a terrible backyard gardener. I love meat. I grew up with a lot of meat, in my own family's food traditions. And so this all felt very sort of judgy. It was like, why are you judging me, for the way I eat? And if we can't rely on a critical mass of backyard farming, white vegetarians to solve the problems of our food system and by extension our looming environmental problems, then we're not going to get anywhere. This is just we have a real problem of elitism here. And so that was true, I think, in a lot of the solutions that were proposed in the energy field when I was covering that. How is a Tesla and a Prius and solar panels on your roof accessible to middle and low income Americans? It just isn't. And is it something we even want because it's being promoted as this very LL Bean kind of aspiration?
Okay, so as you're building this up, I had something pop in my head, so I just want to say it and then get a response.
Yeah.
Impossible Burger at Burger King. That seems pretty accessible.
Oh yeah.
So
hell yes. 100% supportive of that, and
because that's I don't think you can get more accessible than Burger King.
Yes, bring it.
That's
absolutely
accessible, right?
Yes, and in fact, there was a great moment for me when I was working on this book when this permaculture farmer called Chris Newman wrote a manifesto. I think he published it at medium.com or something. But anyways, he said, clean food, if you want to save the world, get over yourself. I grow, and he was saying, he grows, raises pigs and cattle, and he sells his pork chops for $9 a pound, and he sells his, beautiful, hamburger meats for similar
he's
prices. He's doing it. And he said, I can't afford my own products.
Right.
My neighbors can't afford my own products.
Right.
I grew up in Antioch, outside of Washington, D.C. I came from middle and low income neighborhoods where nobody could afford the food I'm growing. We cannot keep preaching, everybody should pay three times the amount that they're paying for their food.
Right.
This is not going to work. And it's not only that, but it is so exclusive.
It's also crazy.
And it's so crazy and it's wrong. So he said, I'm 100% advocate for meat alternatives, for cellular meats. If they can grow meat in a laboratory that tastes as good as the meat that I'm growing in my permaculture farm, then why not do that? Right. Why not do both? And if he can do it or she can do it for 4 times, for half the price or less than my permaculture, or my sort of craft meats, then great. And let's have both. And my meat doesn't have to be threatened by your meat, but we can, have options for everyone. And so I think that is it's a hugely important point here. And often when we talk about, climate solutions, so many of those solutions are out of reach, and they do not, are not relevant to those of us who eat at, Burger King and McDonald's and buy from Costco. Like, we have to have solutions that scale.
Yes.
So absolutely. I mean, that's a major turning point. And these products that are coming online, not only from Impossible Foods, but Beyond Meats.
Yeah.
There's a lot of these brands that are coming out right now that are bringing really affordable plant-based meats into the mainstream. And you wouldn't have thought 5 years ago or even 3 years ago that we would have mainstream acceptance of a product, in the case of Impossible Foods, that has synthetic animal blood, right? I mean,
Right.
it's a little crazy and out there, and it's gotten a lot of pushback in the media. But it has this ingredient called heme.
It's heme.
Yeah, which tastes like animal blood.
Hemoglobin, yeah.
Yeah, but it is derived from
Plants.
soy plants,
Yeah.
right? So it's a perfectly natural ingredient, even though there's a lot of controversy
right.
around that.
Yeah.
It just tastes like animal blood, and I actually
This is people getting offended at science.
that's right.
I mean, like, if we would just take all the emotion out of everything you just said, the plant has heme. It's got something that is just like what you're used to when you bite into a juicy burger.
Yes.
It's just coming from a plant.
It's just coming from a plant.
It's not really synthetic. I mean, like,
Yes.
in terms of, like, manufactured in some, like...
Ersatz is a
Yeah.
better word. Well,
Yeah.
and actually, Impossible Foods has repeatedly pushed back and said, "Don't say synthetic blood."
I've never heard that, but to me, I'm like, it's not synthetic blood. It's coming out of a damn plant.
Well, right, and that's important. I mean, the point is, it's simulated. It's a simulation of blood, but it's a natural plant-derived.
The whole thing is a simulation. Can we just
Yes.
say the whole thing?
Well, okay, that is true, and I will say, I mean, we can talk about.
But is that okay?
Yes, it's absolutely
Isn't that okay?
Yes, it's okay. Absolutely.
What's wrong with?
I mean,
what's wrong
tofu
with
is
the
that's
correct.
right.
What's wrong with the
Everything
simulation?
I love the act of biting into a burger. I love the juicy blood running down my. And I was really actually a bit disorienting for me when I had spooned some of this heme, which is the simulation of animal blood, the plant-derived animal blood, let's say. And I spooned it into my mouth, and it was like sucking on a paper cut. I was like, oh yeah, it's that metallic, bloody thing that, I mean, that's what drives me. I'm into that.
Yeah.
I like the blood, and that's what we're going for. And it's hard. It's really disorienting for us to come to terms with the fact that we are, those of us who are carnivores and who love meat, that we are really after that. But when you break it down and you sort of deconstruct what you're interested in meat, and actually in the laboratory of Impossible Foods where I have visited, they're like, this is what you're craving. You're craving this kind of funky cabbage taste, and you're craving this kind of course, umami flavor, and this kind of crunchy fat, and this kind of, and there are, they have broken it down into the molecular components of odor, taste, texture. And it's amazing to think about what it is that drives us as eaters.
Yes.
And so the molecular biology of food cravings in this country. But still we have this idea that, no, I like to, I want to go back to pre-industrial agriculture. I want to, just think about that, cow that's been raised with all these, humane, this beautiful sort of bucolic farm, and has lived a happy life and died, peacefully. And I had that, cut of craft meats. And no, I'm not like someone seeking basically blood, salt, fat, protein, and we have this very romanticized version. We're very nostalgic about food, and when you break it down to these components, it makes people very uncomfortable. It's like, that's not what I'm craving. I'm craving this sort of bucolic, or these memories. I'm not craving these sort of molecular, these separate ingredients. But we really are, when you have the Impossible Burger, tastes so much like the actual burgers that many of us have grown up eating. It's kind of like, okay, this is something you can decode in science. Yeah, you can take this, that beef burger and break it down in component parts and produce those without animals and put them all together and get a product that tastes exactly like the meat. And there's nothing, and that's a breakthrough. That's an innovative breakthrough, and it's a great thing from an environmental standpoint. I mean, you look at the benefits to the environment, and they're extraordinary. It's 95% less water goes into the production of these burgers than into the production of animal-based burgers. More than 90% reduction in greenhouse gases. The inputs that go into, if you're not growing the entire cow, you're only eating 40% roughly of that cow and meat. Everything else is basically waste.
Right.
So you're saving so much when you just make the meat.
Yep.
And you don't have to grow the hide and the bones and the organ and the hooves and all that. And so, the benefits are amazing. The taste is exactly the same. The big controversy has been, is it better for you, or is it as easy for your body to process? Is it as healthy? And there's been a lot of concern that no, it's not as healthy, or that it's not like eating a veggie burger. It's not like eating a bean burger. And that's true. These are high sodium burgers. They're high fat burgers. It's basically what you get from
a burger.
A burger, yeah. But they're not trying to sell it to vegans and vegetarians.
Yeah. This is not about health, y'all.
No.
This is about an alternative to eating meat.
Yeah.
That is very meat-like in almost all the same ways.
That's right.
Right? That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, this is not also...
It's not necessarily better for you, but it's better for the planet. I mean, I guess
that's right.
The basics,
it's not
right?
necessarily better for you, it's better for the planet. Interestingly, there are some benefits, to cholesterol benefits.
Okay, sure.
And of course, the beef patty that goes into a Whopper is, in terms of the quality, and the health, it's a bit different. On the
low end? Is it fair to say it's on the low end?
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly high. It's fairly high fat, and it's fairly, there's a lot of different ingredients in there. There's some contaminants in there. There's some bacteria in there, and so on, which is actually, there are benefits to that too. But the point is, this is not a cut of meat that's, it's cut with a lot of fillers, right?
Yeah.
And so,
but Burger King is feeding the world.
Burger King is feeding the world.
Not just America. The world. Let's be super clear.
Super clear
I was just in England. There's Domino's Pizza and there's Burger King.
That's right.
And they're all over there. We are exporting this stuff, this shit. We're exporting it.
That's right.
So we got to get it into those scalable channels, right? We got to get it into those scalable channels. I consider myself to be a person who likes to eat healthy. I do not shop at Whole Foods. I shop at Aldi.
Yeah. I shop at Kroger.
Aldi's got first of all, Aldi is basically a third of the cost of Whole Foods. It's like a straight up third.
Straight up third.
And they have all sorts of fake meat stuff and vegan stuff. We're not all the way there, but we're a lot more there than I think people. The issue is way more narrative and story than it is reality.
Yes.
In terms of what we could do if we basically accepted that climate change is a real thing and that what we eat could be the deciding variable as to whether or not it gets reversed or it just continues into oblivion. To me, and I haven't studied this very much, but that just sort of seems like the deal.
Yes, no, that's exactly right.
Is that the deal?
That is the deal. And there are potentially some health benefits, right? There are actually some meat alternatives that are coming out that will have health benefits.
Great.
Right now, what's
That's
on the
awesome.
market, these early adopted products, are almost indistinguishable from, the meat patties. But there's actually a lot of room to improve so that it will not only be good for, much better for the environment and help stabilize climate, but it will actually be better for public health. So as we start exporting all this stuff, it can be better. It can be lower cholesterol. It can be, healthier fats. It can be higher, protein and iron and nutrients and so on. There's all kinds of room for improvement of these products. Mm-hmm. Whereas with conventional meat and the way that we're doing mass-produced mass-produced meat,
that system,
you cannot improve on it.
Can't
right?
turn it around.
No.
Can't turn it around.
And it is so high input. It's for example, so much water. It's 1,800 gallons of water or something goes into a pound of meat. I have to check that. But water resources are going to get...
seriously. Could you just say that number again?
Yeah. 1,800 gallons of water go into a pound of meat, the production of a pound of meat. Can you please double check that?
I mean, double check that, but
Yeah.
like, seriously, people, like, look, I get it. But like, this is why it's so scary that this issue is politicized. Because to not be able to hear information like that, like, I get it. We're humans and we learn through story. Like, I get it. And I get, like, this is a tough story to tell. We got to figure out how to tell it. But, like, come on.
Yeah.
Like, how can you be conservative? Which, by the way, I am not anti-conservative at all. Like,
Right.
there's a ton of things where I think, like, we need to be conservative about, right?
Sure.
How can you be conservative and, like, not listen to a stat like that and say, shit?
This is it. This is a conservative issue. This is the essential. This is the quintessential conservative
issue, right?
Because it is profligate waste that's going into, for example, livestock production.
Right.
The cost of water to bring the cost of water into middle and southern California, which is where so much livestock production is getting higher and higher and higher because the Southwest has huge water scarcity problems. The drought pressures are becoming greater and greater. So to get water into these, facilities that are raising the cattle, that are, producing the beef that go into the Whopper, is going to be more and more and more expensive. And to produce all the corn that fattens the cattle that goes into the Whopper is getting more and more expensive and climate vulnerable, right? There were 17 states in the middle of the country that are corn-producing states this summer that couldn't produce corn and soy. Actually, soy is also a key input in the feed that feeds the cattle that goes into the Whopper. The 17 states could not, most of the farmers in those states could not plant their corn and soy because massive storms came in and they drenched the fields and they couldn't get the seeds into the field at the right time. The machinery was too heavy to go into the wet fields and there were billions and billions of dollars of losses. And so what I'm saying is that cheap burger is going to get a lot more expensive because the production of the livestock and the production of the feed and water that go into livestock is becoming so much more difficult.
Okay, so this is awesome topic. There are these residual costs to activities that don't get built into the price of things all the time.
Yeah.
And it just feels like we're now really coming to terms with this on many fronts.
Yeah.
Many fronts,
Yes.
right? So many of them are technology driven, but we haven't really had them hit us on food yet.
Yeah.
How might the food industry avoid the inflation of the prices to extend the runway by masking the costs elsewhere? Where would we look? Because obviously the minute that they raise the prices, then that's like the jig is up. That's the tell.
Yeah.
Right? That's the tell that, this is costing a lot more than we thought it was. Right.
Yeah.
So they're not going to want to do that right away.
Sure.
Because that's going to, impact demand. People are going to say, I need a cheaper alternative. I need something cheaper. I can't afford my burger anymore.
It'll make the Impossible Burger
the Impossible Burger's going to look a lot better, right?
Yeah.
So my assumption is really, really rich people don't get really, really rich by playing by the rules. And they're very crafty. They're very clever. So where will they stick the cost of this first? It'll eventually get to the burger, but where will they hide it first?
I don't know about, I don't know the question about where they'll hide it. I think that they're going to try to avoid huge increases in cost by radically reducing and improving efficiency in production.
Okay,
right?
so they're going to make a good effort. They're going to make best efforts.
Yeah.
At actually.
Oh yeah. No, I mean industry, the meat industry and the big ag industries are really aware of these increasing costs, and in fact they're heavily investing in a lot of these alternative. I got to some of my meat reporting because I was writing about Tyson and Tyson's investments.
Tyson's big in this. I know that.
Plant-based alternatives and in even lab meats and stuff. And it was the CEO of Tyson who told me, if we can make meat without the animal, why wouldn't we do that?
Right,
I mean, of
right.
course, like
That's
we're
right.
going to benefit most if
That's
we
right.
can cut back on water and feed, and we don't have to deal with the the problems of humane treatment of animals and all the legality that they deal with around their operations.
That's
of course
amazing.
We're going to
That's amazing.
move away from animals.
That's amazing. Okay, great.
Yeah,
Good.
but then same thing with, for example, big ag. One of the most interesting stories I reported was on the agrochemical inputs and how expensive it is to produce these chemicals, how problematic they are because they have huge human health consequences. We've heard all about the problems of herbicides and getting into foods and, glyphosate and cancer, potentially carcinogenic chemicals that are so prevalent in our food systems. And they're not even working, right? They're like, the weeds are developing resistance. They're, the fertilizers are way overused.
Yeah.
They're, ruining soil health. They're running off into water, into, nearby water bodies, causing algal blooms. I mean, there's so many problems with existing industrial agriculture. And in fact, so much of it is a problem of efficiency.
Yeah.
The areas where you're seeing huge potential for improvement is precision ag, is artificial intelligence and robotics. That's coming in a big way. So I reported on this, the first robotic weeder, which is I thought it was going to be like a C-3PO robot that would go into fields and like pluck out the weeds, but no, it's actually this huge sort of device that gets put on the back of a tractor with 24 cameras on it, uses computer vision to see and distinguish between crops and weeds. It can, with sniper-like precision, deploy tiny jets of herbicide and or concentrated fertilizer, incinerates the weeds without touching the crop plant. And it reduces herbicide use on the field by more than 90%, close to 95%, because it's instead of
it's sniper shots.
Yes, it's sniper shots instead of broadcast spraying, instead of brrr, it's
Right.
like tss, tss, tss. And this is a huge advantage for a farmer
It's amazing.
I visited this Arkansas farmer where they were, deploying these early stage robotic weeders. And his costs in herbicides are far above, any other costs. There's a very weedy state, but the point is that it's better for human health. It's better for the farmer. It way cuts back on chemical usage, and it cuts back on the cost to big producers, right? So you're saying, where are they going to stick the cost? Well, I mean, they have to just basically bring in really common sense efficiencies that don't exist in agriculture right now.
Yeah.
And one of them is the way over use of water, irrigation. I mean, we don't have precision irrigation on a big scale, and that's becoming an important area of focus. We have to really cut back on over-fertilizing fields, and that over-fertilization evaporates into the air and becomes a very toxic greenhouse gas, and also has all this problem with polluting water tables. All of that is going to be much easier to address with AI and robotics. So technology, the tech fixes are pretty extraordinary, but they also are scary because we want people to get technology out of our food, right? We're like, I want to have my nice backyard chicken coop and my local farm.
But haven't we given that up so long ago? Like, don't we all know about Monsanto and GMO and don't we already know that tech and science is embedded into the food? Like what?
Well,
like,
so
like,
that's
why
that's
is
the point.
some
Yeah.
acceptable and I don't know. That doesn't. Okay.
So GMOs and Monsanto is exactly one of the key reasons why we have so much fear about technologies applied to food.
Okay.
And for that matter, all these chemicals that are showing up in who knows what way. Are they causing? Are they at the root of Alzheimer's and autism and allergies? And there's a lot of fear of all these ways in which major industries and ag companies have insinuated technologies into our food in the form of chemicals or GMOs and seeds or mass monocropped fields. We're really afraid, and for good reason. We have misapplied technology in some pretty serious ways.
Yeah.
And some GMOs have really backfired. And there's really good reason to, be cautious about technologies applied to food. But there are ways of doing technology that actually support and elevate sustainable principles for food production, and that can really reverse and redress a lot of the problems created by industrial agriculture.
Of course. Of course.
Yeah. And we have huge misconceptions about what GMOs are and what the consequences are for human health. And so this conversation needs to be had. The problem is that people are scared to even have it.
Okay. Sorry, I was just seeing if I was still in the frame. Sorry about that, because I screwed up. Okay.
No. Yes.
4 words: climate change, global warming. I never hear the words global warming anymore. All I hear are the words climate change. Why?
Great question. I think because we're seeing very big swings and volatility in the weather, and so we'll often climate change can result in much bigger and more severe blizzards, for example. And global warming, the term global warming doesn't really capture that.
Yes.
It's some people have suggested that it should be global weirding rather than global warding because it's not just warming. I mean, here we are 5 days or whatever, 2 weeks into this massive heat wave in Nashville. It's October and it's 98 degrees outside or something.
98 degrees.
So we're feeling this phenomenon as global warming.
Right.
Global heating.
Yes.
Yeah, this is not even warming. Warming sounds kind of nice.
No.
Heating, this is serious heating, and
no rain.
And no rain, serious droughts, which is it impacts farmers as well as all of us. But I think climate change is, it feels like it doesn't really capture it either because it feels so sort of formal and clinical or something. It doesn't. Warming, at least, is a sensory experience. Like you, in some ways, that feels like it gets us closer to the experience of what climate change is doing.
And it's got the word global in it, which helps you. Like it anchors it on the whole world.
Yeah.
Whereas climate change.
Yeah, I know, right?
Like it could be isolated to the Caribbean. You know what I mean? Maybe they're just dealing with it over there. Right. So anyway, like language is so important and so hard. This has been a terribly difficult story to tell.
And one of the ways we hear it now is the climate crisis, and the word crisis is tricky too because it's sort of this is alarmism, and you're going to alienate those of us who are not even on board with the fact that it's a scientific reality.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to sort of avoid histrionics, but it's a really tough thing.
It's really tough,
and
it's very frog boiling.
Yes,
kind
frog
of thing,
boiling.
Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's why for me this story was interesting because there's so much humanness in what we eat and how we grow it, and the really radical changes that are beginning to happen, both in terms of the impacts on farmers. And, for example, I've been doing some reporting on impacts on farmers in equatorial, countries that are, producing most of the coffee. There are 20 million coffee farmers in equatorial countries, about 17 of them, that produce, most of the Arabica coffee in the world, which is the delicious coffees. And they're facing massive impacts from climate change. And it's not just about hotter temperatures, which is a serious problem, and it's not just drought, but it's about shifting seasons, which are confusing plants. It's about invasive diseases. It's about fungi that thrive in warmer and more
ecosystem.
And more humid environments. So it's not there's not just a single way that climate change is having impacts on farms and on food producers. It's many different ways. It's intensity of rain, not just the amount of rain. It's the again more mild winters and earlier springs. It's diseases and fungi. It's invasive insects. It's insect populations and shifts in insect populations that are driven by weather changes is a huge problem for farmers. But there's one story that connects all of it. And that story is climate change is becoming something we can taste. This is a kitchen table issue, very literally. And
I want to ask. I have a question I want to ask you about this. Water crisis in Chennai, India.
Yeah.
So, like, I didn't know about that until, like, the summer, and I went to Nexus Global Summit, and it was like, oh, yeah, there's no water there.
Yeah.
Okay? So, back to your point about crisis and how, like, Des, did you know that? Did you know? You didn't know that. You didn't know that they ran out of water there, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
So we already know we don't get all the information.
Oh, yeah. By the way, there are more than half a dozen famines, full-blown famines in this world right now that are not being reported.
Like, this stuff is not being reported.
I mean, and the famines are driven largely by drought, but yes.
And so we know the stories. Let's just assume the story is too hard to tell. And it's going to take something to, like, hit us over the head. And, many of us can, like, look at the weather and see that it's clearly changing, but, like, we can say, oh, well, maybe that's just supposed to happen anyway. It sounds like what I hear you saying is one day you're going to wake up and you're going to go to the store and there's not going to be any coffee. Or the coffee's going to cost 10 times what it cost before. Like, one of the two things is going to happen. And you're going to be like, what the hell? Now you've intruded in my life.
That's right.
Right? Like now I don't care about terms and politics and votes and who doesn't have water here or who's starving there. Where's my fucking coffee?
That's right.
And why does my coffee not cost $2? Why does it cost $10?
That's right.
And
where are my peaches? Where is my citrus?
Give me my shit.
Where are my avocados?
Right.
Where is my where are my apples? Where I mean and interestingly, the specialist crops, the ones that like very specific conditions in which to thrive, which are all the high nutrient, high flavor crops. Those are the ones that are hardest to adapt to new growing conditions. So berries,
Oh my gosh, are
citrus,
you serious?
Yeah, berries, citrus, peaches. I mean, our Georgia peaches have been going through it. The Florida citrus industry and the Florida peach industry is hugely vulnerable right now. I mean, I went to visit apple farmers in Wisconsin whose apple trees they don't go into a deep dormancy in the winter because it doesn't get cold enough. The trees need to go into a deep sleep basically in the winter, so they kind of stay awake. And then the minute there's a sort of heat wave in February, which now is common, right? They fully bloom, and then they're totally vulnerable to a normal frost. So I've visited farmer after farmer who had been through a total kill event, which is early bud break. The blossoms come out, the freeze comes and wipes out millions of dollars of apples, in an entire region of Michigan or Wisconsin or Washington for that matter. And if you're growing trees, it's very hard to uproot them and put them somewhere else. It takes 6 years to get those apple trees online and producing fruit. So these apple farmers are freaked out, right? I mean, how do they then adapt their farm to this new normal? And these agricultural states are actually the states that largely elected President Trump, who's denying climate science. So, I mean, and I would say, how do you feel about climate change and climate policy? And they said, I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to tell you if this is climate change.
Right.
But I will tell you that I'm growing in conditions that are totally different than my father and grandfather,
right,
or my mother and grandmother, but I'm not going to tell you that this is climate change. So that kind of thing is really astounding to me.
Yeah.
There's a huge disconnect between the way we talk about food production and the politics of climate change, but they're so connected. But yeah, those of you who love beer and wine, I mean, hops is becoming incredibly difficult to grow and source for beer production. And so, I mean, I've story after story of, beer producers who need a lot of water and who are moving away from water-scarce regions. I mean, a lot of beer production has moved out of California because California has so little water. Wine producers in France, wine production in France was down 13% this summer. Bordeaux, France, hit 106 degrees Fahrenheit. It had never been anywhere near that because the heat wave in Europe was massively damaging to vineyards. So yeah, this is real. I mean, this is like happening now.
Wow.
And the reason I got into this is in 2015, I read the IPCC report that came out, and this is what it said. We will see 2 to 6% reduction in global crop yields every decade going forward for the rest of this, in perpetuity. But let's just say for the rest of the century. Meanwhile, we're supposed to be going to 9.7 billion people by 2050 in 30 years. So we're going to add...
That math is like the worst math ever.
We're going to add more than 2 billion people to this planet, but we're losing 2 to 6% of our global crop yields. That's hundreds of millions of acres of cropland going offline because of extreme, weather conditions or extreme drought or heat. So how do we do that? How do we feed humanity in the climate change era, right? And the language was this. I memorized it because I just couldn't believe I was reading this. The language was, by mid-century, the world will have passed a climate threshold beyond which large civilizations can no longer be fed by current agricultural practices. That's 30 years from now. So, okay, our current agricultural practices will no longer be able to feed large human civilizations, and we're trying to go to a much larger human civilization. This is a serious issue. But here's the bright side. This narrative that we're running out of food is as old as human civilization. Humanity has been running out of food since civilization began 10,000 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. We've been coming up against the limits of our arable land and the limits of what technology can do, century after century, millennium after millennium. And what happens is our survival instinct kicks in. We go, oh, we're going to, this is fight or flight. We've got to adapt. And so what happened, we couldn't have anticipated that we would figure out how to create synthetic fertilizers, which is what happened after, Malthus predicted that the world would run out of arable land. Well, we figured out how to goose up that soil and make it, more productive, and we tripled global food yields in the last century, right? We created hybrid crops, and we created new breeding methods, and we found ways to, massively increase the food supply. Well, that's caused other problems, as we've just discussed. There are all kinds of problems with industrial agriculture, but it has fed triple the global population. Now the question is, can we grow smarter? Can we grow more nutritious food with less environmental impact that's more climate resilient? And can we use that instinct for survival that has been driving human innovation for millennia? And can we use that in a way that can solve the existing problems in our food system and prepare for these much higher pressures, much higher environmental pressures?
Answers in your book?
Yes, the answers in my book.
Name of the book?
The Fate of Food. What we'll eat in a bigger, hotter, smarter world.
Buy it on Amazon and everywhere else in the world?
That's right. And at your
airport bookstores?
Yes, too? At your local bookstore. I don't know. Ask your airport bookstore to carry it.
Yeah, they should carry it. Yeah, as you get on the airplane, that's kicking out all sorts of carbon.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Amazing. All right.
Well, it's a lot. I know.
It is a lot.
It's a lot. It's sort of like, I don't know how far I drifted from my origin story.
Well, no. I'm glad the conversation went where it went. I do leave this with, I'm an optimist anyway.
Yeah.
So I leave with a sense of hope.
Absolutely.
And, look, I was losing faith that we were going to be able to tell the story anyway. So if the jolt that's going to hit the developed world is going to be through what we're able to eat on a daily basis, you're right. That is undoubtedly going to wake us up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That might tie into our sense of survival more than anything, because you hear people say all sorts of crazy things I can't survive without my coffee. I can't.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? So those statements that's real belief systems. Those are real belief systems.
Right. And when your hamburger or your strawberries or your Pinot Grigio is on the line,
right,
or your, beer, your Heineken, and if that's on the line, and you realize that this is the thing that you want to fiercely protect,
yeah,
then yes, it is about, this is common ground, right? I mean, this is not an issue for progressives or conservatives. It's an issue
That's not
for
gonna work.
anyone who wants to eat.
That's right.
And it's an issue for anyone who really believes in equitable and sustainable distribution of food. Because the people who are feeling this in a real way are subsistence farmers. You know, you and I might go to the store and maybe see fewer coffee options, more
Right.
expensive coffee options. We don't have as many avocados, right? We have these very subtle signals of disruptions in food supply.
Yeah.
But what this means for a subsistence farmer in India, and I interviewed many of them in Maharashtra, around Mumbai, where there's, you know, huge phenomenon of, you know, farmer suicides because of massive debt, because farmers can't produce enough. There's just no irrigation, because the climate pressures are so intense, and the debt pressures are so intense, they literally can't survive.
Hopeless.
And throughout Southeastern Africa and Kenya and Ethiopia in particular, huge environmental pressures there. And so that's where climate change and the impacts of drought and invasive insects and so on is a matter of survival. And when we talk about this, you know, in our lives, it's, oh, we're going to have slightly different burgers.
Right.
We may or may not be able to tell if they're, you know, grown in a lab, or if they're from plant-based proteins, or if they're from craft meats. Or, you know, in Kenya, this is a question of whether there's enough calories produced in the economy to sustain a population. And that's today.
Yeah.
That's not in 30 years.
Right.
Right? And so this is a very different conversation over there. It was important to me to tell this as a global story, because the way we think about food is, for, you know, for me, it might be, am I going to have my, like, acai berries on my, you know, breakfast cereal?
Yeah.
And for, you know, and for the farmers that I interviewed in Maharashtra, it's, will I be able to feed my family?
I mean, the sad thing is, it really does feel like it will have to impact the most privileged of us before we make any real movements on it.
Yeah, and it is. And as you say, we are seeing dramatic changes in the way we think about food and talk about food, and the context in which we have the discussion about food and its environmental impact. And so, you know, I agree with you. We have to feel the heat and understand it in a much, you know, more
I don't
immediate
personally.
way.
When I say we, I'm talking about humans,
Yeah.
and especially like us privileged humans in America and
Yeah.
UK and many parts of Europe, and right, you know what
That's
I mean?
right.
That's
Yeah.
really what I'm talking about.
But the takeaway is, because you're someone who's interested in innovation.
Yes.
You're someone who's interested in
I'm,
solutions.
I'm like ready to go start researching all this stuff
Yeah,
now. Like,
because it is amazing to see what happens when we have the pressure of survival driving our, you know, our technology, and we can no longer pit technology against sustainability.
No,
they have to be one and the same, and the technology has
can.
to be at the service of, yes, sustainable solutions, and it is happening. And we have to move this discussion. We're sort of willing to accept technology in certainly communications, in how it can improve medicine and healthcare, transportation. Yeah, but we're fairly comfortable with this notion that technology can create efficiencies.
Yeah, that's right.
And
That's
move
right.
us in a good direction. And, you know, let's say, you know, automotive technology
That's
or
right.
something like. Most people, there's no like riots against electric cars anymore. There was for a while.
Yeah.
But we are really uncomfortable with this notion that technology is going to have to be a part of the way we think about food solutions and feeding humanity.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
so that's interesting. And if you can really, you know, begin to see that kind of, you know, step change, that kind of really important disruptive technology happening in sustainable food production, it's a big leap for, you know, for those of us who believe that technology can play a role in creating climate resilience and sustainability, and can also have dividends that are, you know, about survival and justice and equitable distribution of really high quality food, you know, and I think that's important. That technology can confer social and environmental value is important. And suddenly we're beginning to see this in this food arena, which we never would have thought was possible. Sorry, I got carried away there.
No. Like this is.
Did you look up the 16. Is it
I
1,600
did.
gallons?
So yeah, that's true. I looked up an article on Vice magazine, and they said that food comprises 2/3 of the average American's water footprint. So it is correct. It's 1,800 gallons of water.
1,800. You were wrong. You were 200 short.
No, I
You
said 18.
Oh, I thought you said
But
1,600.
No, but then I worried that it was
1,800.
1,800
1,800.
gallons of water.
All right.
A pound of beef.
We're wrapping. You need to buy this book. AmandaLittle.com also, like,
That's
for
right.
following up on you.
Oh,
yeah.
and then my
what
Instagram
else?
is Amanda Little Trip, and
you have an Instagram now.
yeah, I'm really a rookie, but I'm trying. I'm trying.
Okay, this is not a long answer question. Are you going to like make a Netflix or Hulu film about this?
Yes, I have actually 4 different production companies that are trying to option the book right
Go
now.
girl. That's
Thank
amazing.
you. Thank you.
We need this in like visual audio.
It needs to be told. It's a video. It's
a visual story.
It is a visual
for sure.
story.
Yeah,
it has to be. Yeah.
It's great that you went and did all the research for the book.
Do you want to do it with me?
Maybe. maybe. Maybe.
Yeah. You know.
Maybe.
Like, we can't just. Yeah. It has to be done right.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Yes, the visual story is so crucial to this because there's so much to see. It's quite amazing.
On that note, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marcus.
All right, we'll see you next time. Peace.
Peace.